Okay. Okay. Good evening and good morning, and for everybody. So I would like to welcome you all. Today we are publishing the 8th consecutive edition of the annual European Islamophobia Report, and we are pleased to have also the authors of our report, country reports. We have with us today 4 authors, and also the co-editor of the European Islamophobia Report, Farid Hafez, from Williams College, and also the Bridge Initiative, Georgetown University. We have also with us today Kawtar Najib from Liverpool University, and also Amina Smits. She is a PhD candidate at Medeniyet University in Istanbul, and also Jeroen Vlug from Ibn Haldun University. And thank you very much, everybody, for your participation today. And first, I would like to start with a general summary of our report, general findings. As you know, we have been publishing these reports for 8 years now, and this is the 8th report that we publish today. And each year we have also, other than the country reports written by experts and academics, we have also introduction in which we try to summarize together with Farid the main tendencies in Europe with regards to Islamophobia. So today we are pleased to present you the 8th consecutive annual edition of the European Islamophobia Report on the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is observed on the 21st of March globally. So this is an important day. And this year, 26 scholars and experts have contributed to this European Islamophobia Report, and they address the state and development of Islamophobia across Europe in 2022. And we have 23 national reports in this year's report, and they include annual edition, this year's annual edition, invite policymakers, civil society, scholars, and all people interested in Islamophobia to gain insight and knowledge on the most important incidents and data regarding Islamophobia in Europe in 2022. Since its first publication of this report, covering the year 2015, the European Islamophobia Report has become a cutting-edge source for information on Islamophobia in the fields of politics, media, employment, education, and justice. The annual European Islamophobia Report also exposes European Islamophobia networks and highlights initiatives to counter Islamophobia in Europe. The present report investigates in detail the underlying dynamics that directly or indirectly contribute to the rise of anti-Muslim racism in Europe. This extends from Islamophobic statements spread in national media to laws and policies that restrain the fundamental rights of European Muslim citizens and ultimately threaten society as a whole. As a result, the European Islamophobia Report 2022 discusses the impact of anti-Muslim racism on human rights, such as freedom of association, freedom of speech, and religious freedom, and the state of law in Europe. This 8th edition of our report reviews the effects of the ongoing war in Ukraine, the coverage of the FIFA World Cup 2022 in Qatar in European media, and how anti-Muslim legislation and measures in states like Austria and France have developed and have been fought by civil society. The 23 country reports demonstrate how governments, political parties, and media participate and counteract in reproducing discourses that put the fundamental rights of European citizens in jeopardy. This compendium of useful insights and data aims to provide European policymakers, institutions, and NGOs with recommendations on how to tackle anti-Muslim racism in Europe, both effectively and systematically. As last year, this year's European Islamophobia Report has been materialized with the support of International Islamophobia Studies and Research Association based in Berkeley, California, and the Othering Belonging Institute at the University of California. Also, Rutgers University Center for Security, Race and Rights, and the Berkeley-based International Islamophobia Studies Center, the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project at the Center for Race and Gender at the University of California, and the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies Program at San Francisco State University. Also, the Vienna-based Leopold Weiss Institute, and lastly, the Research Center Social, based in Novo Mesto, Slovenia. So we would like to thank also our cooperation partners for their support to European Islamophobia Report. And we think that the unanimous adoption of the United Nations resolution that declared March 15th the International Day to Combat Islamophobia is a major success in the global recognition of Islamophobia as an existing and pervasive problem. This resolution holds the potential to be used by civil society and politicians who have been fighting Islamophobia in the past to put pressure on the nation states that have, on the one hand, promoted Islamophobia and make them accountable for their actions, and on the other hand, pressure such states to take concrete action against Islamophobia. The beginning of war in Ukraine seems to have overshadowed other domestic issues, including Islamophobia, to varying degrees across Europe, while in Russia, civil society activists and journalists expressing dissent have been subjected to criminal prosecution with the help of the law on non-commercial organizations, the fake news law, and the law on military censorship. The persecution of members of various Islamic groups in Russia and the further inclusion of Islamic books such as an version of Sahih al-Bukhari on the list of extremist materials has continued in Russia. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has also uncovered the stereotypical perspective of many Europeans vis-à-vis different kinds of refugees, welcoming white Christian female Ukrainians as opposed to the often violent resistance and rejection of Muslim refugees. In regard to institutionalized Islamophobia, the Austrian Integration Minister Susanne Raab organized the second iteration of the Vienna Forum on Countering Segregation and Extremism in the Context of Integration to export her battle against so-called political Islam to other European countries. A total of 11 countries are said to have participated in this forum. On a national level, Raab has increased the annual budget of the Documentation Center of Political Islam to 1,700,000 euros from the original 500,000 euros. As the strongest ally in this politics of institutionalized Islamophobia, France continued its path of a crackdown on its Muslim population. Emmanuel Macron's systemic obstruction policy has led to control of 1,727 Muslim institutions, 118 closures, and 1 million euros seized between January and August 2022. In the field of education, In the field of education, the so-called laïcité plan to control and police Muslim women bodies has been implemented. A national education directive forces teachers and administrative staff under threat of penalties to detect too long skirts and to report female pupils and to file a disciplinary complaint. Kawtar will talk more in detail about the situation in France, but this is a general, observation with regards to France. Similarly, in Belgium, which also Amina will cover today, the Minister of Justice pressured the leading imam of the Great Mosque of Brussels to resign or risk losing government funding for the mosque. In Denmark, a hijab ban in elementary schools was suggested. The government set aside funds for teachers to recognize and prevent so-called negative social control and honor-related conflicts for the next 2 years. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has largely ignored the fight against Islamophobia while defending the infamous government's prevent counter-terrorism strategy and vowed to refocus it on the threat of so-called Islamist extremism. The all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia was officially rejected only days after the new government took office. Criticism by European Commission against the intolerance doesn't seem to echo with many of these member states. At the same time, other European institutions reproduce one-sided analysis that conflate radicalization and violence with Islam, portraying Muslims in the Balkans, for instance, as a security threat, as is the case with the European Commission's Kosovo Report 2022. So there are 4 specific recommendations that emanate from the 8th volume of our European Islamophobia report. There are also many other concrete policy recommendations that our authors have suggested for their countries. And also, if you look at the previous European Islamophobia report, we have also concrete suggestions, policy recommendations for generally speaking for Europe. But there are 4 this year that we would like to highlight. And the first is that the new United Nations resolution declaring March 15 as International Day to Combat Islamophobia should be used by policymakers and civil society actors to press for more change in the fight against anti-Muslim racism. Second, we reiterate the urgency as declared by European institutions, especially with regard to the member states of the Council of Europe, to take the ECRIS General Policy Recommendation number 5 on preventing and combating anti-Muslim racism and discrimination seriously and to implement it. The recommendation should also be included in the various national action plans of European member states. We reiterate that European and national institutions should take the findings of the European Union's Agency for Fundamental Rights as presented in the Directive on Combating Terrorism, Impact on Fundamental Rights and Freedoms seriously and recognize the damage of anti-terrorism legislation on Muslim communities across Europe. And lastly, Austria's attempt to export its infamous witch hunt against Muslim society via the newly established Vienna Forum on Countering Segregation and Extremism in the context of integration must be fought back by EU member states. So on that note, I would like to finish my presentation. We will publish and upload our European Islamophobia report, the 8th edition of our report 2022, at the end of this panel, and our also viewers can download it from our website. So I thank you for your attention, and now I would like to give the word to Farid, and then he will talk about the situation and his report on Austria for 2022. The floor is yours, Farid.
All right, thank you so much. And it's unbelievable to see that we are sitting in front of the 8th volume already, having done this kind of work for such a long time. It's great to see all of you again, some of you new authors, some of you who have been in the team for a while now. And as Enes has already said a couple of times, there were made references to Austria. So I will focus here on a couple of aspects which I think are interesting in terms of the year of 2022. First of all, Sebastian Kurz is gone. That's quite important to note here, because Sebastian Kurz as a person and the inner circle of his group that was governing Austria from 2017 to 2019 was, in fact, I would say, the champions of institutionalized Islamophobia. So we had so many laws and measures coming from that government, not only when they were in a coalition with the far-right FPÖ, but also when they continued another coalition with the Green Party, which is traditionally more of an anti-racist to some extent. So a lot of the legislation, a lot of the political measures that were implemented during the time of Sebastian Kurz were actually rescinded by several courts. So most famous was definitely, I think, the hijab ban in elementary school that was rescinded by the Constitutional Court. But then there were also other administrative courts who rescinded several other measures, such as the ban, the closing of mosques, for instance. Now, what is interesting to follow up with, it's like back then, the Minister of Interior of Sebastian Kurz's government, who is now the Chancellor of Austria, has not really continued a lot of these anti-Muslim legislations. So there was initially a plan, and that was one of the things that was revealed actually in 2022, that there was a secret plan apart from the official government coalition program that said that there would be a hijab ban also for Muslim teachers in school, all right? Which did not happen because the rationality of the argument from then on, following the Constitutional Court's decision, was that we could not enact a ban on the hijab specifically and only targeting Muslim women. To give an example, like for instance, when there was the hijab ban, there was explicitly an exclusion of the kippah for the Jewish boys, right? So it was not like banning and outlawing religion in general, but very specifically targeting Muslim religious belief. So another interesting aspect was also that there had been, prior to the elementary schools hijab ban, there had been a hijab ban in preschool institutions and kindergartens, which also had been in place since 2019. But that was also not continued. That was based not on a legislation, but on an agreement between the federal government and the state governments. So that agreement was also not continued again. So we see that there is, it seems, on the one hand, in terms of this general anti-Muslim legislations, there seems to be an end to the story the time being. Which does not mean, obviously, that Islamophobia and institutionalized Islamophobia is gone. As Enes has mentioned more than once, Austria is still very much in the game, and he has spoken about the Vienna Forum. But before speaking about the Vienna Forum, what I would really like to do is also shortly speak about two other important things, which will be the two main aspects of my presentation here. First of all, the Operation Luxor. So for everybody who is not aware of the Operation Luxor, the Operation Luxor was in fall of 2020, one of the largest police raids that happened and that I also fell victim to against so-called political Islam. 70 people and institutions were raided. Their bank accounts and assets were frozen. At 5 o'clock in the morning, people were stormed in their private houses, the children traumatized by heavily weaponized secret and intelligence forces and special forces of the police. So what is interesting in terms of the Operation Luxor is that until today, around more than 30 cases have been dropped. There has been no single case that went to the court. Nobody has been put into custody. And most important, what happened in 22 were two incidents in regards to the Operation Luxor. Prior, in 2021, there was already a decision made by the appellate court that the Operation Luxor, as the raid itself, was unlawful. So again, we see how the justice system was able to fight back the anti-Muslim policies and measures. But in 2022, what happened were two things. First of all, there was an interesting case, which is a man called Osama Abul Husna. He is a person that is of Palestinian origin, has no citizenship. And on November the 2nd in 2020, when an ISIS sympathizer killed 4 people in downtown Vienna, what he did, he rescued the life of a police officer. So that's how he became like super famous on an Austrian level. And a couple of months later, he was included as a suspect of terrorism as part of the Operation Luxor. All right? His case was also dropped, as was mine just like 2 months ago. His case was dropped in 2022. But what happened afterwards was that he applied for citizenship. And he was not given citizenship because the intelligence service would argue that he is still close to terrorists. The reason why he was included in the Operation Luxor in the first place was because he was part of a pro-Palestinian aid organization. he himself coming from Gaza, basically helping people who fled Palestine as much as he fled Gaza himself, right? So that again shows you that in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of the institutional dimension of Islamophobia, we are still troubled with the same problems that have been in place for such a long time, right? So the second important aspect in terms of the Operation Luxor is the two of the experts, one Heiko Heinisch and the other Nina Scholz, who have been very infamous anti-Muslim writers and publishers and experts, so to say, of the government. Their expertise has been one of the two most important bases for the legitimization of the Operation Luxor. And given the centrality of the expertise, there was a huge setback for the Operation Luxor because they were dismissed following a wave of appeals coming from the defendants of the Operation Luxor. So basically, Operation Luxor lost, so to say, 50% of its intellectual basis, right? Yeah, maybe one word also in regards to the justice system and the Operation Luxor. In 2022, there was, when I appealed against the case that was made against me, there was a decision made by the Regional Court of Graz. The Regional Court of Graz was basically the court which legitimized everything the state prosecutor wanted in the first place. So they never really fought back to the conspiracy theories. And if you read the decision against me that was published in 2022, it said, and I will quote this, it said that, speaking about my person, the activities in the preparation of the so-called Islamophobia report, the report I'm just presenting here with you guys, and activity with the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University, which is where I work as a senior researcher. And the quote goes on, are intended to disseminate the fighting term Islamophobia with the goal of preventing any critical engagement with Islam as a religion in order to establish an Islamic state, end quote. All right, so basically what you could see here is the way the intelligence service as well as parts of the justice system reproduced that kind of paranoia of conspiracy theories that talking about Islamophobia basically is a sign of terrorism. And that was the reason why they upheld the case against me during the year of 2022. Again, my case was dropped in early 2023, but that was in terms of, speaking about the year of 2022. All right, there is one more thing in terms that I would like to add here in terms of the Secret Service, because I think that is one of the most troublesome aspects of Islamophobia today. Enes has already mentioned that the annual budget of the Documentation Center for Political Islam has been more than tripled compared to its original budget that it started with in 2021. So it's now 1.7 million euros that this institution, which is basically an institution of surveillance of Muslim civil societies, is using to continue its work of, as I would call it, the criminalization of Muslim civil society. What is important here is that obviously the newly structured intelligence service, which is now called the DSN, which is the Directorate for Security and Intelligence, is basically continuing its work of seeing any kind of Muslim civil society activism in a way as a form of political Islam. And the understanding of political Islam, which the intelligence service has had in the past, is basically similar to the German state, which speaks of so-called legalistic Islamism, or as I'm sure we're going to hear from Kawtar, in terms of Islamist separatism in France, this idea that Muslims do not work against the law, but they are subversive in their activism. Once they participate in the larger societies, what they do is they infiltrate the state institutions in order to create this imagination of the worldwide caliphate, right? And what is especially problematic in terms of the newly structured intelligence service in Austria is that the new director of this institution is basically somebody who was implemented during the time of Sebastian Kurz, who has some affiliations, though not formally, with the Conservative People's Party. So in a way, the history of this newly structured intelligence service goes back to a very close relationship with this new younger elite within the Conservative Party that had started all of these anti-Muslim waves several years ago. So my very last point is, in terms of the Documentation Center Political Islam, is to speak a few sentences about the Vienna Forum. I don't know how many minutes are still left, Enes.
Well, a few minutes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So really, everything I want to say in terms of the Vienna Forum is that this Vienna Forum started like in 2021, and there were only like 4 countries participating in it. The main idea is basically to export the fight against so-called political Islam on the Austrian scale on a European level. And the countries that had been participating first and foremost were obviously France, as I think the champion of Islamophobia in Europe, and a couple of other countries, including Denmark. So in 2022, the Vienna Forum has expanded its reach to including more than 11 countries. And what I find especially troubling is that some of the countries that have been participating were countries which I would say are the least anti-Muslim ones, like Portugal, like Spain, when we speak about the institutional dimension, but also obviously including, again, France, Germany, and others who have been very strongly advocating for a stronger hold on Muslim civil society for many, many years. So I think what it really needs on a European scale here is really to fight back this trend and to see also the kind of European networks that are emerging. And I just remind you of what happened in fall of 2020 after the murder of Samuel Paty and the attack in Vienna that I had briefly mentioned before. Austria and France and Germany drafted a paper for the European Commission to go against terrorism, and included like lots of mentions of Islam. A lot of the other EU member states fought back and in a way excluded many of the mentions of the Islamic religion. But I think what we are seeing here with the Vienna Forum is this attempt to really grow in the impact of this French and Austrian alliance to make its discourse the hegemonic one. And I see that as very, very, very frightening for the European landscape. So I'll end here, and thank you for listening, and looking forward to another interesting input by all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Farid, for your presentation. And from one champion of institutionalized Islamophobia, we go to another one, which is the France. And the Kawtar Najib has been authoring the French report in the last years. So she has been also following the developments in France for a long time now. And I would like to give the floor to Kawtar, and she will present also her report on the year 2022. The floor is yours, Kawtar, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to the European Islamophobia Report team for this invitation. I'm going to introduce myself very briefly. I'm Kawtar Najib. I am a lecturer in human geography, and I've been working on Islamophobia for several years now, even decades. I'm French, and because I work on such a topic as a French Muslim woman of color, it was very difficult for me to find a job in France. So I ended up working here in the UK, but my work still concerns France, and today I'm going to talk about the French case and the year 2022. So the year 2022 in France was particularly Islamophobic in the political and media sphere, notably during the last presidential election. President Macron has been re-elected in April 2022, and for the first 4 months of this year, the whole presidential campaign, not only his, but also that of other candidates from far right to centrist parties, has been very difficult for French Muslims. I even personally consider that it was the most Islamophobic presidential campaign in French history, notably with the participation of a new candidate, Éric Zemmour, who shared a very hostile and worrying anti-Muslim program. So he's not the only one, even if he's definitely the most aggressive one. But we had different levels of Islamophobic comments, discourses, political speeches, the promise of new laws that would go even further than what we have today in France. For example, that would go further than the anti-separatism law. So as some may know and notice even outside France, Islamophobia is very present in politics and even embedded in laws. So instead of having laws that protect religious and ethnic minorities, we have many discriminatory laws. And the starting point of this French Islamophobic machine, if I can say so, goes back to the 2004 law, which bans the hijab in public schools. So almost 20 years now that we see the multiplication of anti-Muslim laws. So from that year, 2004, the laws has become increasingly Islamophobic and increasingly repressive. After that law, there was the 2010 law banning the niqab, the full face veil, on the streets. Then there was the 2015 law implemented under a state of emergency that allowed the search of several families with no concrete results today. And then 2021, with the law against separatism. So this notion of separatism is very vague. To the point that it is difficult to really understand what they are targeting. But when we see the results of this law, it is clear that the Muslim community as a whole is targeted. This law allowed the closure of local mosques, of human rights NGOs denouncing Islamophobia, of Muslim schools, of publishing houses, etc. So all of these are signs and signals that show French Muslims that these political measures target them directly, as well as their religious practices. In theory, this anti-separatism law is supposed to combat political Islam, radical Islam, the violation of laicité, but in practice, they have directly impacted French Muslims' everyday lives. So in 2022, this policy, which is built to be a systematic obstruction policy that prevents the public expression of Muslimness, has not stopped and even continued at the same pace as last year, as 2021. And between January and August 2022, we have seen many controls, closures, as well as millions of euros seized. So because of these closure and particularly the closure of independent NGOs monitoring and recording anti-Muslim acts in France, there is a real lack of detailed and reliable data for the French case. It is today very difficult to find independent data for the year 2022 inside France, and even governmental data at this stage of our investigation. The data from the Ministry of Interior come from the Central Territorial Intelligence Service, which has not published yet a report for 2022. That said, there are data outside France, which, for example, from the CCIE, the Collective Against Islamophobia in Europe, which has published a report very recently for the year 2022. This report mainly concerns the French case and highlights a total of 501 acts in France in 2022, including in great majority discrimination, followed by incitement to hatred, insults, physical aggressions, and incident linked to the fight against separatism. So we can see that the CCIE, as an independent organization, can collect data linked to anti-separatism law, that is to say, data describing Islamophobic situation, which would be the consequences of these laws implemented by the French government. Therefore, there is a real problem if the Ministry of Interior remains the sole guarantor of official anti-Muslim statistics inside France, because it means that any detailed description of anti-Muslim racism in France using only the data from the Central Territorial Intelligence Service cannot engage the direct responsibility of the French government. Clearly, studying state-run Islamophobia in France is a priority, because today Islamophobic acts per se are no longer analyzed in detail. Very few reports exist, very few testimonials can be found on governmental reports, on media news, and even on social media. So this year, the spotlight has been a bit different. It has not been anymore in the closure of Muslim organizations, mosques, etc. It doesn't mean that it has stopped, as I said previously. This year, the spotlight was directed toward Muslim leaders and the expulsion blackmail they suffer, especially with the highly publicized case of Imam Hassan Iqiyoussen, who has been expelled from France for comments made decades ago that were deemed sexist and anti-Semitic. But despite the transcription of several apologetical speeches that deconstruct his previous thoughts, and despite being born in France, living in France for more than 50 years, being married in France, having French kids and French grandkids, he was still deported to Morocco. His lawyer has clearly denounced the scandalous and disproportionate nature of this case, and has even noticed that the French Minister of Interior, Gérald Darmanin, who requested this expulsion, was too involved involved in this case, to the point that she talked about a personal manhunt where the legal becomes political, the political becomes the legal, and the political becomes people's court. Such a mixture of different orders, the legal order, the political order, the public order, question many observers, such as lawyers, as well as political scientists, and as well as international organization, about the impartiality of the French justice system. Some of them expressed important concern and explained that France is moving away from the rule of law, and others even believes that the last pillar of the Council of State has been broken in the face of this Iqiyoussen case. So the mixture of orders has also been noticed in education with the implementation of the laïcité plan in November 2022 to remedy a new trend currently emerging in French high schools, that is the wearing of abayas and kamis or thobes by young high school students, girls or boys. These are long garments that cover the whole body and have been described by the French government and by some school principals and teaching and administrative staff as an attack on secularism. The new French Minister of National Education and Youth, Pape Ndiaye, launched this laïcité plan to regulate and police the clothes of these young students. In great majority, this plan affects young student girls who wear the hijab outside their high school. So these girls agree to follow the 2004 law by removing their hijab at the entrance of their high school, but still undergo major discrimination related to the rest of their outfits, essentially their long skirt, but it can also be their long sleeves as well as their hairband. So this laïcité plan explains how to detect a problematic skirt, how to report the wearers, and how to file a disciplinary complaint if necessary. These are national education directives that teachers and administrative staff must follow under threat of penalties. So here, this is where I talk about the mixture of orders. The role of these teachers has changed because it changed from an administrative order to a correctional order. But we have this famous political scientist, Françoise Vergès, who says that school is not the police. So I am questioning the world here. I am not sure that this beautiful value that is laïcité, that was laïcité actually, because actually nowadays laïcité has become a synonym of Islamophobia. In the name of laïcité, you can implement all and develop all the Islamophobic laws and tools that you want. So I'm not sure that in the name of laïcité, we can police the clothing of our young students. I am not sure that we can ask a young student girl to remove her long skirt and stay in leggings, the leggings that she has under her skirt, and stay like this all day during in her high school. So this is what the laïcité plan will be able to allow now. So this mixture of order can also be seen when political candidates give directives directly to French police during their presidential campaign. This is the case of candidate Zemmour, who gave a speech in February 2022 in front of police officers and made them understand that they are at war against part of the French population and mainly against Muslims. You can find the exact quote in this report, but such speech can obviously cause significant anxiety among French Muslims, and rightly, because when we see that only a few weeks after this speech, 3 police officers violently attacked and attacked 2 young women in hijab on the Clichy Bridge in the Parisian region. One of the 2 women was slapped and beaten by one officer who tried several times to remove her headscarf, while the other woman was thrown to the ground and left unconscious for a few seconds. So this attack became so violent that many witnesses, such as passers-by, bikers, etc., felt the need to intervene and try to stop the police. So we can see how politicians can clearly influence police violence against Muslims. We can see also how famous figures can influence clearly white supremacist crimes. This is the case of the famous French writer Michel Houellebecq, who explained during an interview to a French magazine that the killing of Muslims in their local mosques or in their local cafes by white supremacist groups would be an act of resistance when entire territories will be under control of Islamist control. So many observers have described such a comment as an apology to terrorism, which is a criminal offense. The Great Mosque of Paris, La Grande Mosquée de Paris, tried to file a complaint, but did not renew its appeals. So this is something that should be really taken seriously, because unfortunately, only a few days after this speech, a white supremacist attacked and killed 3 prominent figures of the Kurdish community in a cultural center located in Paris. And this atrocious, deadly attack was not severely condemned in the media, and was even on occasion excused by some openly Islamophobic TV channel in France. So as a conclusion, we can see that Islamophobia is everywhere, and this is something I personally study. I call this pervasive phenomenon spatialized Islamophobia, which shows that Islamophobia occurs in global politics, in the national media, in education, in the workplace, on the streets, and perhaps even in within our own family. So these recent years, French society can be the witness to a political turn, which is much more repressive against Muslimness and its expression in the public space, and much less severe with racist thoughts and its expression on in the public media and political space. So French policy has highlighted an uninhibited, normalized and legalized anti-Muslim racism that we can clearly notice with the concrete multiplication by 11 of the number of far-right deputies in the French National Assembly between the first and second elections of President Macron. So in 2017, only 8 seats were occupied by far-right deputies, and in 2022, there are 89 seats. So to try to end on a positive note, I can say that even if there is in France a real criminalization of any space of anti-Islamophobic resistance and struggle, there are nevertheless some notable initiatives conducted by French Muslim associations, French politicians and journalists, as well as international and NGOs. It is definitely easier to wage this fight outside of France, and France should definitely abandon the idea of assimilating its own French Muslims by de-Islamizing them as well as their organization. On the contrary, France must respect its Muslims by developing anti-discrimination laws ensuring their protection, because such a policy of de-Islamization does not seem to work, does not seem to function, because French Muslims, despite all these repressions, do not seem to give up their Muslimness, which is increasingly visible and well integrated into French society. So one thing is sure is that French Muslimness will necessarily be part of the future of France. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kawtar, for your presentation. I should admit that, well, we are aware what is going on in France, and since we are also editing the report and reading the whole national reports also, yet when I hear it, it's more dramatic and more shocking. Once you hear it, what's happening there, I mean, it started with the headscarf ban, and now it doesn't stop there. And the government try to regulate the length of the skirts of the people, the youngsters, the girls and boys. At the same time, this is something very, I mean, shocking even for me. But that's to say the reality, and that's why I think it's important. Our work is really important. Last year we have organized this panel in France, and together with some NGOs, activists, and many told me personally that they feel also supported if there is publications outside of France regarding the situation of the Muslims in France. So we do really thank you for your work, for your contribution, and for being also the voice of an oppressed community in France, the Muslims. Thank you very much. And now I would like to continue with our third speaker, Amina Smits. She has authored this year Belgium report, and there are probably some also implications what has been discussed in France, because part of Belgium is also French speaking, and as far as I remember, also the discussions are quite similar. So I would like to give the floor to Amina. The floor is yours, Amina.
Thank you, Professor Bayraklı and Professor Hafez as well for having me here. First of all, I would like to stress that I've been doing research on the Netherlands before. For those who have been with us for a couple of years, they will know that I was doing research on the Netherlands previously. And I must say that there's a big difference between the Netherlands and Belgium in so many different aspects. And as a Belgian, it was very frustrating for me to read certain things and to come to certain conclusions. And when we continue, we'll see why I was so frustrated at certain things. First of all, what drew my attention is the lack of sources in Belgium. So when I would do research on the Netherlands, I would easily find many sources and many articles published in newspapers, both online and in actual physical newspapers, sharing news on Muslims that have been assaulted, in mosques that have been assaulted, new legislations that have been published, both pro and against Muslims. And it's like when we look at the Belgian sphere, but the Belgian news sphere, media sphere, it's as if they are being like systematically excluded from the news. Like there are no Muslims, or there are no Muslims that need to be managed or need to have guidance or need to be discussed or debated. It's like they are barely existing within the Muslim society. Like when I would do a thorough research and do like fill in certain terms in any news agency, and when I would choose Islam or Muslim or headscarves, barely anything popped up. I would always find articles in other countries, but not within Belgium. It's as if nothing's going on there and nothing is happening there, which was really striking for me, because I know that actually under the surface, there's so much going on there, and that is just not being exposed to the world. So this is something that might need to be researched. Besides, this regular report is something that needs to be researched more thoroughly, in my opinion. When we look at the organizations that actually do research about Islamophobia, is on the one hand, we have UNIA in Flemish, and it is more focused on discrimination in general. So it would deal with discrimination towards all kinds of fields. So it could be based on color, it could be based on gender, it could be based on religion, all kinds of things. And we have the CIIB, so it's a French organization. It's a Collectif pour l'inclusion et contre l'islamophobie en Belgique, which literally means the collective for inclusion and against Islamophobia in Belgium. They have been keeping scores and keeping track of all complaints that were filed relating Islamophobic events or any kind of racism or any Islamophobic attack that took place against Muslims. This was their main focus, but actually when we go and look at the numbers of UNIA, almost 10% of all complaints that have been filed to UNIA, we see that they were related to Islam. So 10% of everything that's going on, all the files that they have is related to Islam, and 50% of them is discrimination. So, which means that people are being systematically excluded from the work sphere, that they are not being allowed to reach certain places, that they are being denied entrance to certain places. 30% is hate speech, that Muslims have to face direct insults related based on their Islamic identity. And 1/7 is actual physical attacks, but these physical attacks, unfortunately, we cannot find in any publication. So in any newspaper, we won't find these attacks mentioned anywhere, like on April 7th, this attack took place on a mosque or a Muslim has been assaulted. I mean, it's just being completely hushed. And when we look at the numbers of the CIIB, we see that most of the cases are related to either work or education. So when we look at work, it is usually, again, women who are the victim because of their headscarf. It's a clear, open a test of their beliefs. So it's a clear declaration of their beliefs. So they are often being systematically denied the job they are applying for. So we would see reports of women saying that they got the job if they are willing to get rid of their headscarf, or they would have some excuses like it doesn't meet our requirements, it's not safe, or it doesn't fit the uniform, etc. So they are being systematically excluded because of their headscarves. And we see the same thing actually when we look at education. Women are still not allowed to wear a headscarf within public schools. So there's still a debate going on, and this debate has been going on for at least 10 years, maybe even longer, from I think maybe 15 years even, like that women are not allowed to wear a headscarf in class in front of their students. They are allowed to wear it outside of schools, of course, but not inside the classroom in front of their students, because teachers are supposed to be neutral. They are expected to behave neutrally, and if they wear a headscarf, it means that they are not neutral and trying to impose their own views on the students. So right now, so every year, especially when the new year is about to approach and they are facing a severe crisis because there aren't enough teachers, and especially with COVID and many people being sick more regularly, they had a huge teachers gap. So they started turning towards women with hijabs, like, can we add them to the work sphere? Can we allow them to teach? And here the biggest issue is that actually the main reason why they are willing to accept women with a headscarf as a teacher into the educational sphere is not because they think it is their basic right as a Belgian citizen and with their freedom of religion to wear a headscarf, but because it is just not practical and sustainable to keep systematically denying them the entrance, the access to jobs as a teacher with a headscarf. And this is also causing a lot of debate within Belgium. Of course, some people say like, okay, we can accept them, but only because we don't have enough teachers. And then we have, of course, some parties who argue with this and don't agree with this and say, well, actually, that's not the right reason to do it. If you're going to do it, please, if you're going to accept the headscarf, please do it for the correct reasons. Please do it because you think it is their basic right as a Belgian citizen to have access to all jobs they want to perform or want to have. And unfortunately, it is still something that they are being systematically excluded from. And this is not just for the educational sphere, it is for all kinds of jobs. Most of the complaints that are being received on Islamophobia and on discrimination is within the work sphere. The second sphere is the educational sphere again. Like I said, because of the aforementioned reasons, and also because girls are not allowed to wear headscarves in front of school, while there is no official public statement, no official law that states that girls, especially in Flanders, cannot wear a headscarf, are not allowed to wear a headscarf. Schools are allowed to take their own initiative, which led to almost basically 99.99 schools deciding to not accept the headscarf. So we can basically say that there's a general ban, like an unofficial, non-declared ban on the headscarf for girls, which also makes it more difficult for them to actually actively pursue any career whatsoever, because often they would decide to finish their education via long distance education, online education. There are different alternatives, but they are not really as good as, you know, one-to-one actual physical education. And or some would just drop out and say, you know, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to go anywhere anyway if I'm not being allowed with the headscarf to work anywhere. So they are just being systematically discriminated within the educational sphere, which is still the biggest issue. Which brings me to the issue of Islamic schools. In the Netherlands, there are several Islamic schools that are being accepted and sponsored by the government. But especially in Flanders, there's absolutely no possibility whatsoever to have an Islamic school sponsored. There have been many attempts to have one accepted. And the latest attempt was from 2022, where pluralism tried to have their school recognized officially to have the government subsidies. But unfortunately, even though they were considered as fulfilling all requirements, all physical requirements and all educational requirements, just because the school was founded and partly sponsored by a Turkish group from Turkey. And they were labeled by the secret intelligence in Belgium as being extremist and Islamist and a threat to all Belgian ideals and their liberal ideals, etc. So the Minister of Education, Ben Wijts, decided to have the school cancelled and not accept any kind of, not give any subsidies whatsoever. So the school was not able to open its door because they did not have the support of the government, and the school was not able to offer an official diploma upon graduation because it was not recognized by the government. Another big issue with the government and big clash that is going on with the current rightist government, N-VA, New Flemish Alliance, and Muslims is that actually the Minister of Justice, Van Quickenborne, pretty much declared a witch hunt against the biggest Muslim organ in Belgium. So we have the Muslim executive and the Muslim executives in Belgium. And it's the most important organ to arrange communication between Muslims and the government and arrange all Muslim affairs. And there's basically, he has systematically been trying to get rid of this organ for the last couple of years because he deemed it not to be Belgian enough, because he claimed that it was sponsored by people with bad intentions, people who wish to undermine the Belgian authority, the liberal secular order that has been established in Belgium. Furthermore, he claimed that they were being that they had secret alliances with terrorist organizations, or that they were working for secret intelligence in Morocco and other countries. So they were, in the end, they were pretty much bullied. The head of the Great Mosque in Brussels was pretty much bullied into resigning because he got under so much pressure that he decided to hand in his resignation as the head imam. And afterwards, despite having stayed in the country for so many years, he was sent back to Morocco. And in his place came another imam, and now the head of the Muslim executives is a man who has Turkish roots, but still Van Quickenborne is not satisfied, and he decided to still completely root out the Muslim executives, and he has stated this on several occasions. Last time he stated this was a couple of months ago, that he was really determined to get rid of this organ because he views it as not functioning properly and being full with illnesses and just spreading the disease more and more, the disease of being radical and Islamist, and that he's really determined to get rid of the organ, and that they are planning to, they completely cut off their subsidies by the end of the year, and they are intending to start a new organ completely based on Belgian premises, on Belgian conditions, not according to what Muslims actually need or want, but how the government wants Muslims to manage and govern themselves. which is the fourth most important issue in this report. Another big issue is the concept of lone wolves. It's something we see all over Europe right now, but especially in Belgium and the Netherlands, if I'm not mistaken. The concept is like we don't have many anti-Muslim organizations or really terrorist groups that are anti-Islam or anti-immigrant, etc. But what we see is that there are so many individuals that are being nurtured by the online data and being nurtured by the online availability of anti-Muslim propaganda and are being triggered into actually acting towards Muslims. And even if these are not large-scale attacks, they don't always consist of, really taking a rifle and going on a killing spree towards Muslims. It's just like they are systematically being fed with so much anti-Muslim propaganda that they are prepared to go through this stage and become a terrorist, actually, and to really assault Muslims just randomly on the streets. So, which is also the reason why you often see on the news like 1 or 2 people have been attacked by a white Caucasian male, but whose reasons are not clear, and often it is tied to their psychological state rather than actually having Islamophobic roots. For some reason, these are often labeled as being having psychological issues or coming from a difficult background, but they are never labeled as Islamophobic or racist. Even when there was a raid against extremist groups, and I'm not saying Muslim extremist groups, just extremist groups that were raided at the end of August, beginning September last year. They were raided and they were found to have a huge amount of weapons. And the reason for this was actually because they were anti-government. But the shock that you saw on some of the news presenters' faces was really golden, because they could not believe that they were not actually Muslim terrorists, but that they were white terrorists trying to undermine the government. It was really really interesting to see, because I remember one interview in particular. There was one specific news presenter, and there was like, they were white, right? They were white. They were not brown. They were not Muslims. These are white people trying to undermine the government. So the shock there is something that is really so distinct, like mentioned before with the Ukrainian women that were welcomed with open arms into Europe, but when it comes to Arab women, that the attitude completely changes. It's something that we always see again and again. Yeah, and what I want to conclude this report with is that actually, like, nothing extreme has happened in Belgium, like happened in France, for example. Luckily, that didn't happen. But what we see is like a sort of chronic Islamophobia that seems to have been so vested and so rooted in Belgian society that people are not even aware of it anymore. And it has become like a second nature for both Muslims and non-Muslims in Belgium to, to have this Islamophobia present and to be systematically denied access to certain fields of life. And this is actually something very worrying, and something that seems to be continuing. It's I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's becoming unbearable, but I do see this tendency of, this chronic Islamophobia seeping into more organs of Islamic communities, like, for example, the Muslim executive being cancelled, losing their subsidies, and like the government is slowly trying to take more control over how Muslims govern themselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Amina. Thank you for your presentation. And I would like to now give the floor to our last speaker, Jeroen Vlug. He has authored the Dutch report this year. First time he is joining us, and he's also an academic at the Haldun University. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I also thank the previous speakers for their very insightful presentations. Insightful but concerning indeed, unfortunately. I want to also give you all a warm greetings from the Netherlands, where I currently reside, and what was also the focus of my chapter for the Islamophobia report of 22. I also congratulate the editing team for having been able to done this important work for the past years, and I'm very happy to have been able to contribute to it. My talk will be about the current state of affairs regarding Islamophobia and anti-Muslim racism in the Netherlands over the year 22. It's a topic that's dear to me, but I also contribute to it as a researcher at the Dutch Institute, MoVZ, and the program Platform Inclusion and Society, also known as KISS, and also as an academic, an academic at even Haldun University, which is based in Istanbul. Dutch society remains highly polarized and divided on the issue of Muslim presence in the Netherlands. According to statistical research of the Netherlands Institute of Social Research, the SCP, a significant part of the Dutch Muslim community struggles with what they call chronic discrimination. More than 55% of the Dutch Muslims experience discrimination based on their faith, or as being assumed as a practitioner of the Islamic faith. And in addition, the registrations by the police and anti-discrimination bureaus and the Netherlands Public Prosecution Service show that of the discriminatory acts based on religion, the vast majority is targeting the Muslim community. Throughout 2022, several events occurred that intensified the debate on Islam in Dutch society. One of the most important ones is the increased securitization and monitoring of informal mosque education. A lot of controversy arose regarding the intention of the Dutch Minister of Education, Enes, to pass a law that would enable the inspection of education to closely monitor Dutch mosques. This is because allegedly these mosques would educate students in a way that was anti-democratic or anti-integrative. And we know from previous research of the past 20 years that these terms, anti-democratic and anti-integrative, are mostly used in the radicalization discourse. And what's interesting is also in the letter of the minister to parliament is that he's addressing informal education in general, not mentioning the Islamic community in particular, but he does use these terms. Basically, we all know that who is targeted here are mostly the mosques. And what is also a big problem here is that whilst he pushes for this law, most public officials at the ministry and also the state attorney have advised against this move on the grounds that it infringes upon the fundamental rights of the Muslim community, such as the right to religious freedom and also the right to free association. This is why towards the end of 22 in December, many Islamic institutions actually started a court case against the minister for this very reason. Additionally, in 2022, we saw many incidents related to ethnic profiling and institutional racism. This was a big discussion both in politics as well as in the public discourse. Many of these incidents relate to the Dutch National Police, but also the military police and the tax authorities. In May of 22, the Dutch government admitted the existence of institutional racism. This is mostly due to the controversies that were sparked by the childcare benefits scandal by the tax authorities. And also in February of this year, actually, which is not included in the 22 report because it was just last month, the Dutch Higher Court passed a groundbreaking judgment regarding ethnic profiling at the Dutch military police, judging that the current border checking policies are a form of racial discrimination. Finally, a big discussion revolved around a headscarf ban for people working in public offices. We already have a headscarf ban in the Netherlands for the police and for those working at Dutch courts. We also have a burqa ban in public spaces and in public transport. And now the Dutch Minister of Justice, Dylan Yeşilgöz Segerius, also called for a headscarf ban for other public offices, such as for community service officers, also called BOA's in Dutch. So these are three of the main controversies surrounding Islamophobia in the Netherlands over the past year. Some more statistics. What we see in the combined statistics of the police and the anti-discrimination bureaus, and also MIND, which is the registration bureau for online discrimination, is that a majority of religious-based discrimination is 67% has targeted Muslims. Also, what we see is that while Muslim discrimination, of course, takes place in all social domains, it seems to dominate in the labor market and in education, which seems to be very similar to what Amina Smits was talking about in Belgium, but also in the public sector, so in hospitals, municipal services, tax authorities, and the like. So institutional racism is also a very big part of where Islamic or Muslim discrimination takes place. In terms of the statistics on which forms of Muslim discrimination take place, these takes all types of forms, of course, but the most types of registrations were about verbal abuse, also about vandalism of mosques and other Islamic institutions, and violence in combination with verbal abuse and threats. Now, I do have something to say about these statistics. While it is true that what Amina told in her presentation, that we do have a little bit more data on what is happening in the Netherlands, it's still very insufficient. And this has to do with, while we do have registration bureaus and the police does have registrations, we actually know that for various reasons, Muslims tend to not register if something has happened. And this has to do with the low trust currently that Muslims have in the state authorities. And also many of these points where people can register discrimination, they are relatively invisible and inaccessible. So while we do have data on these issues, we know that actually these only show the tip of the iceberg. And that's actually a major problem that we have in terms of the statistics on the Netherlands. Also, the statistics that I just spoke about, they cover 2021. This is because the statistics of 2022 will be published most probably towards May of this year. And because of the many controversies that happened last year that I just mentioned, it might very well be that the registration data will be much higher than in the previous year. To keep my presentation relatively short, I will summarize some of the basic events and trends that we see in Dutch Islamophobia in 2022, and finish with some of the main policy recommendations. As a researcher at Movizi, I also work with local Muslim communities in battling Islamophobia, and together with many of these grassroots activists and institutions, we've also developed policy recommendations, and I will tell a little bit about them. What we have seen is a rise of anti-Muslim activism in 2022. Things like destroying of Qurans, not the burning of Qurans, because that is forbidden in the Netherlands, but we have seen at anti-Muslim demonstrations that pages of the Quran, for example, were ripped from the Quran. We have also seen anti-Islam barbecues during the Ramadan in front of mosques several times. Various mosques have received threat letters. We have several registrations of these in Amsterdam, but also in other big cities of the Netherlands. And there were several cases of arson and vandalism at mosques and at Islamic institutions. Another thing that came up very frequently were issues surrounding the headscarf. These involved mainly job discrimination, which recently a lot of quantitative research has been published about, and also the headscarf regarding public offices, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation. And finally, the whole controversy around the securitization and monitoring of the Muslim community. Most recently, of course, the informal education at mosques, but it has been an issue previously as well. For example, in 2021, there was a secret probe actually supported and financed by municipalities in mosques, which sparked a big controversy and was all over the newspapers, which is also one of the reasons why Muslims have a very strained relationship currently, especially at local governments. In terms of the political discourse, we see that anti-Islam politics was dominated by the usual suspects, such as the PVV of Geert Wilders. But what we also see, interestingly, in 2022 is the rise of new, smaller rightist fringe parties, such as the Forum for Democracy and some of the smaller ones that split off from Forum of Democracy, such as Ja 21 and the Van Hege Group, because they had some internal problems and issues. So we have many, on the right side, many smaller fringe parties that also have a similar discourse as the PVV has. While these parties vary somewhat in their political agendas, they hold very similar stances regarding immigration, integration, the presence of Muslims in Dutch society, such as a complete stop of immigration from Muslim majority countries and very stringent assimilation policies. However, it's only the PVV who actually wants a complete ban of the Quran and to close down mosques and Islamic institutions. So these more, let's say, smaller fringe parties tend to be less outspoken on those issues. We also see that the public and political debate is fueled by anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim rhetoric by several rightist media outlets, such as Geen Stijl, which means no style, and Ongehoord Nederland, Unheard Netherlands, which is a publicly funded television station, which has sparked a lot of controversy by stating many things that are seen as racist and Islamophobic. And we also see the participation of several public intellectuals that spread anti-Islamic rhetoric as well, that some of whom are related to well-known universities in the Netherlands. A final word on Dutch government policies. The Dutch state seems to have an ambiguous stance towards Muslims and Islam in the Netherlands. On the one hand, it has made great strides in terms of anti-discrimination and anti-racist policies. For example, for the first time in 2022, the Dutch state officially apologized for the role of the Netherlands in transatlantic slavery. It also acknowledged institutional racism in the context of the child care benefit scandal. And also there was a national coordinator against discrimination and racism established, who is a very active figure currently in the debate on Islamophobia and other types of racism. At the same time, we see the rise of these new rightist anti-Islamic parties, fringe parties, and we see, as I spoke of in the presentation, several ministers calling for the headscarf ban, calling for mosque securitization and monitoring. So yeah, there's a very ambitious relationship with the Muslim community and a very strained relationship with the Muslim community. I want to end my presentation with some of the policy recommendations that were developed with grassroots Muslim organizations. One of them definitely should involve more recognition of institutional racism by Dutch governmental institutions, especially in terms of racial profiling, ethnic profiling, and the securitization of Muslim communities. Also, a better cooperation between both national and local governments and anti-discrimination bureaus and other stakeholders in terms of prevention and countering anti-Muslim racism. And in terms of registration, this is very problematic. There should be improvements made to make these registration offices more visible and more accessible for people. A fourth point is an investment in social interventions. This is also something that institutions like MOVIS and others do. Social interventions aimed at battling and preventing anti-Muslim racism, especially at the local level in education, in neighborhoods, and in municipalities. Then working more closely at the grassroots level with Muslim communities, involving them in how we can best combat Muslim hate and Islamophobia. And then lastly, especially at the municipal level, to embed anti-racist and anti-Muslim hate policies, evaluate them and sustainably embed them in local policies targeting anti-Muslim racism. So I want to end with that and thank you for your attention, and hopefully we can continue our discussion.
Thank you, Jeroen, for your presentation. Well, I mean, most of you mentioned that there is not enough data, and it's interesting that since after 8 years, when we started publishing this report, when we first published the report in 2015, there was lots of criticism also towards the European Islamophobia report, and one of them was, okay, but where is the data? This is a qualitative work; it's not quantitative. So where is the proof that there is Islamophobia in Europe? But then, with the time, we've seen that some courageous activists has established NGOs across Europe to record the data, and then we've seen that the governments are targeting these NGOs, and some of them are closed down, especially in France. So it's a vicious circle. However, I think we do not need really the data also, because we are seeing that there are concrete examples of Islamophobia in Europe today, which is also, there are many legalizations now, where many countries has legalized Islamophobia, be it headscarf ban, burqa ban, minaret ban, and it goes on. The list of bans goes on, and each year a new country is joining the club and introducing new laws, or there are discussions going on in different countries. So I think today what we need really is, that we need more NGOs in Europe that can register Islamophobic incidents on a daily basis with a sound methodology, and publish this data at the end of each year. But I know this requires lots of funding and lots of also human resources. But that should be, I think, the next target in the fight against Islamophobia, because I believe now we have enough literature published around Islamophobia, at least for the beginning. There are many areas that needs to be addressed and studied with regards to Islamophobia, but still we have this ground, basic literature with regards to Islamophobia. I think, there are really not many questions here, but if one of you wants to raise any questions to other authors, we can have a discussion round between us, and then we can close the panel. So the floor is open for questions.
Yeah, I mean, I would like, oh, Harun, Jeroen, you raised your hand, sorry. So I'll give you the floor.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, you can go first as well. It's just that Amina made some comparisons between the Netherlands and Belgium, so I'm of course interested in this question. And also because Amina did the report on the Netherlands a few times. I just wanted to zoom in a little bit on the question of Muslim schools. Because you might know that we have a very special system as a country when compared to other European countries, is that we have state-funded religious education, which is established in Dutch law as well. So all religious-based education can be funded. So we have had, especially primary schools, Islamic primary schools, from 1988 onwards. But the last years, Muslim community have also tried to establish secondary schools and higher education institutions, and there was a huge backlash. So there were almost all of them were rejected based on a very vague legislation around the issue of citizenship. So we have a very vaguely defined idea about citizenship, and one of the reasons that they were denied is that the schools weren't explicit enough in how they would approach citizenship. So I'm just wondering, the other speakers in the other countries, what the situation is regarding Islamic educational institutions and how they are funded.
Okay, let's collect the questions and then we will make another round. Farid?
Okay, well, I just wanted to make a remark, like on one of the issues that was raised in terms of Jeroen, the way you put it was like there is an ambivalence that you see in the Dutch government, that there is on the one hand like standing against racism, but on the other hand, when it comes to Muslims, it's like, well, you institutionalize Islamophobia, right? And I think that is like a European trend that we can see. Governments present themselves as, even the anti-Muslim policies are presented as a means to protect the vast majority of Muslims, right? It's not, nobody says like, I am against Islam in such a blatant way. But what we see in the case of Macron and the Austrian government and the Germans and others is that all of these measures are basically presented as a protection of the vast democratic majority of Muslims. But when we see who is affected by these policies, then it's always the organized Muslims, right? So basically it's the silent majority that they are protecting, allegedly. And that is, and I think that is like one of the crucial aspects here when it comes to a seemingly contradiction between being against racism but not really protecting Muslims, the lack of understanding that Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism is a problem of racism, right? There is this exclusion of, when it comes to Islam, we should have this honest debate. While when we speak about blacks and Jews and whatever, well, that is racism, right? So I think, and I want to reaffirm what Enes has talked about at the very beginning, the fact that we now have a UN declaration against to combat Islamophobia, which has been voted for by all of these countries, including France, including Austria, and all of the other countries that we have been discussing here. So maybe at the same point, you know, the intelligence service of my country, Austria, really sees Islamophobia as a combat term to create a caliphate. But at the same time, the Republic of Austria has voted for this resolution. That really gives us a momentum, I think, to really put much, much more pressure on a lot of these countries, be it the civil society or be it those politicians who honestly see the problem of Islamophobia as a real problem in their countries. So I think one of the issues that we have to tackle, and it's interesting to, if we look at the UN content that has been produced around the first adaptation pardon me, the first celebration of the the day against to combat Islamophobia this year, we can see that they basically drew on the definition that was proposed by Tariq Mudud, which is as much as our definition, saying Islamophobia is anti-Muslim racism. So this is just another possibility for us, I think, really to put more focus on how we understand this phenomenon and how this has to be included in all the national action plans against racism that have been adopted since a couple of years now in several EU member states because of the European Commission's recommendation here. So in terms of the discursive level, I think that is really one of the things that we should focus on throughout Europe in different contexts.
All right, thank you, Farid. And another question. Do we have other questions? No? Okay. Then maybe Amina, would you like to comment?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Jeroen, for your question. It's an excellent question, actually. The thing is, actually, in Belgium, you have the right to have government-funded private schools. So actually, when you look at the history of public education in Belgium, we see that actually the original schools were Catholic. The first schools that were founded were, of course, of Catholic nature. And then afterwards, we had the governmental schools that took the place of the Catholic schools, but Catholic schools were still being allowed and recognized by the Belgian government, and were being subsidized by the government as well. And when we look at other schools that are being that receive subsidies, we have Protestant schools, we have Jewish schools next to the Catholic schools as well, and they just are able to move freely within the educational spheres, as long as they stick to the curriculum defined by the government. But when it comes to Islamic schools, we even have like free schools like that offer different types of education. For example, the Freinet schools, we have Waldorf schools, etc., and they are also being subsidized by the government. But when it comes to Islamic schools, I mean, like even if they adhere to all the specifications, all the requirements, be it both physical, I mean, be it the school building, the teachers, even if they can supply the required amount of teachers that have the required background and education, etc. Still, the main reason why most of these, almost all of these schools, if not all of these schools, are not able to be to open their doors actually to reap the subsidies is because when the secret intelligence takes a deeper look into the resources of these schools, I mean like the financial resources of these schools, they are often tied to Islamic organizations, and often because these organizations are again met with prejudices and Islamophobic views, they are often labeled as being Islamophobic or not compatible with liberal values and not being a threat to the secular state, etc. So what we have is then this fear that these fundings will somehow seep their way through to education, and that these teachers also represent the same extreme ideology that is possessed by the people who fund the school, and then the students will also be radicalized into rebelling against the government. So this is actually the main reason, or given as a main reason, not to have these schools doors. So actually there is room for Islamic schools, to get back to your question, but they are not able to do so.
Thank you, Amina. Jeroen, would you like to comment on?
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just interested to hear and also what the backlash is, and it is definitely an area that needs to be explored more.
I see. All right. And Kawtar, would you like to add anything?
No, just for the French case, I don't remember exactly the statistics, but one surest thing is that there is not a lot of Islamic schools in France, and when there is a requirement, like a demand to build new schools, it is mainly rejected by the authorities. So compared to the Muslim population, there is absolutely not enough Muslim schools in France.
All right. Thank you very much. I think on that note, we can conclude. I would like to thank you all once again for your participation and the panel also, but in the report. And we hope to continue next year with the report. But the report will be available quite soon on our website, and it will be shared on our Twitter account also. And then you can also, and all our viewers can download the report from our website and Twitter account. And thank you very much once again to all of you. And hope to see you in our next event and in the also next European Islamophobia report. Thank you.
And
thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Happy Ramadan.
Happy Ramadan to you all as well.
Sure.